The gaslights of the French Quarter bled sickly yellow onto the cobblestones, dissolving the sharp edges of night into a miasma of shadow and damp heat. Inspector John Raymond Legrasse drew a slow drag from his cigarette, the ember a fleeting crimson eye in the gloom, and watched the fog roll in from the Mississippi, tasting of river silt and ancient rot. Another missing man, another whisper swallowed by the humid air. 3 in the last month, all men who thought themselves too important or too clever to vanish without a trace. Legrasse knew better. New Orleans held 1,000 ways to disappear, most of them mundane, ugly. But something about these cases felt different. The first was a mid-level dock foreman named Thibodeau, known for his regular patronage of a certain discreet gambling den on Burgundy Street. He'd walked out into the early hours, ostensibly for a streetcar, and simply ceased to exist. No body, no struggle, just an absence. Then came Alphonse Dubois, a minor alderman with a penchant for expensive absinthe and less expensive company. He'd left a raucous dinner party on Royal Street and vanished between the gaslit corner and his waiting carriage. And now, Henri Beauchamp, a collector of obscure artifacts and local lore, a man whose apartment, Legrasse noted, smelled faintly of old paper and something else, something cloying and marine, even after the forensics boys had gone through it. Legrasse's partner, Detective Alphonse Fonzie Broussard, a man whose girth strained the buttons of his vest and whose skepticism was as boundless as the Bayou, grumbled beside him. "Another one, Chief. You sure these ain't just fellas skipping town with their pockets full of other people's money or their hearts full of forbidden love?" Beauchamp's safe was open, Fonzie. Empty. But no forced entry. No sign of a struggle. The valuables were gone, sure, but why no struggle? Why no witnesses for any of them? The Quarter isn't exactly a ghost town at 3 in the morning. Legrasse exhaled, the smoke coiling upwards like a hesitant spirit. And the note, or what's left of it? He pulled a small damp scrap of parchment from an evidence bag. It was singed at the edges, the ink smeared by what looked like seawater, though Beauchamp's apartment was on the 3rd floor. All that was legible were 2 words, scrawled in an agitated hand. Yehantle Dagon. Fonzie squinted. "Sounds like some kind of frog talk, Chief. Or maybe one of Beauchamp's weirdo books." Legrasse said nothing, the words resonating with a disturbing familiarity he couldn't place, like a half-remembered nightmare. He'd seen the man's library filled with leather-bound tomes in languages he couldn't fathom, and brittle pamphlets detailing forgotten cults and obscure maritime legends. Beauchamp wasn't merely a collector, he was an obsessive. Legrasse had a hunch that Beauchamp hadn't simply vanished, but had gone looking for something, or perhaps something had come looking for him. The next morning, the Bayou air hung thick and oppressive, a shroud over the city. Legrasse found himself in the cramped, cluttered office of Dr. Silas Tremaine, an elderly, almost skeletal scholar of ethnography at Tulane University, whose reputation for delving into the city's darker folklore was legendary. Tremaine, with his rheumy eyes and nicotine-stained fingers, peered over spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Yehantle, you say? And Dagon?" Tremaine's voice was a dry rustle, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. He took a sip of his tea, though Legrasse suspected it was laced with something stronger. "Ancient names, Inspector, very ancient. Not of this land, not truly, though they have found resonance here." in the deeper currents. Resonance? Legrasse leaned forward, setting aside his half-filled notebook. What kind of resonance, Doctor? Tremaine gave a thin, almost mirthless smile. New Orleans is a city built on foundations of forgotten rituals, Inspector. On the whispers of enslaved peoples, on the spirits they brought with them from Africa, and the old gods they found lurking in these humid swamps. Voodoo, we call it. A powerful, resilient current of belief. He gestured vaguely with a bony hand towards a shelf overflowing with arcane texts. But there are other currents, older, colder, stirring from the depths. Are you suggesting these disappearances are supernatural? Legrasse asked, his voice betraying a hint of his ingrained skepticism. Yet a part of him, the part that had seen too much human depravity to dismiss anything, listened intently. I am suggesting, Inspector, that some beliefs have a way of manifesting in ways that defy conventional explanation. Tremaine corrected, his gaze sharp. Dagon, for instance, is a very old Semitic deity, a fish god, but stories of aquatic beings, of entities dwelling in the unseen parts of the ocean, are common across many cultures, including some of the more isolated communities along our coast. As for Yhantle, that is a name associated with an antediluvian city said to be submerged beneath the Pacific, home to creatures not of this earth, creatures that predate man. He paused, a shiver seeming to pass through his frail frame. There have been whispers, Inspector. Strange tales filtering in from the Bayou communities, from the fishermen who venture too far out. Of lights in the swamps, of guttural chanting, of figures seen slipping into the water, never to resurface. The voodoo practitioners, even they are speaking of it. They say their spirits are troubled, terrified even. They feel a new power in the water, one that does not acknowledge them, one that devours. Legrasse felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Terrified spirits. It was a concept that jarred against his rational mind, yet the chilling conviction in Tremaine's voice was hard to ignore. If the spirits of the Bayou, entities supposedly powerful enough to command nature and influence fate, were afraid, then what in God's name was abroad? His investigation led him further into the shadowed labyrinth of the French Quarter, to places respectable citizens avoided. He found himself in the dimly lit back room of a conjure shop, ostensibly selling herbs and curios, but secretly a nexus for voodoo practices. Mama Odette, a formidable mambo whose eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of generations, sat behind a table laden with candles, animal bones, and vive drawings. Her presence exuded an ancient power, a stillness that commanded respect. The police, they poke their noses where they don't belong, Legrasse, she said, her voice a low rumble, devoid of malice but full of warning. But even the police must know when the river runs red with blood, not of man. Legrasse showed her the scrap of parchment with Yhantle, Dagon. Her eyes, which had been regarding him with cautious curiosity, widened slightly. A flicker of something that looked like fear crossed her ancient face. These are not names for human tongues to speak lightly, she whispered, her voice losing some of its earlier strength. The water spirits, they tell us of a coldness, a presence beneath the waves that makes their skin crawl, their voices falter. It is a hunger that knows no satisfaction, a darkness that swallows even the deepest light. The missing men, Legrasse pressed. Thibodeau, Dubois, Beauchamp, are they connected to this darkness? Mama Odette nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the smudged words. The new ones, they come from the water. They seek to call a new master, a god from the deep, who cares nothing for Oleron, nothing for the lower, nothing for man. They spill blood, yes, but not in offering, in preparation. They seek to open the way. The new ones? Legrasse prompted. Who are they? Cultists. She spat the word like a curse. Lost souls, seeking power where there is only oblivion. They twist the old ways, pervert the rituals. They promise strength, but deliver only madness. They learn from books that should never have been read, from whispers that should have stayed buried. Her eyes met his, intense and unblinking. They are not of our ways, Inspector. We seek balance, honor the spirits, even the dark ones. But these, they seek to serve something that would unravel the very fabric of the world. The realization hit Legrasse with the force of a physical blow. A turf war, not over territory or money, but over cosmic allegiance. Human folklore, rooted in community and the cycle of life and death, clashing with an alien, indifferent horror. The voodoo practitioners weren't the villains. They were the first line of defense, recognizing the true enemy before anyone else. The clues started to make a horrifying sense. The marine smell in Beauchamp's apartment, the water-stained note, the unsettling symbols Beauchamp had been collecting. He remembered a crudely drawn sketch among Beauchamp's papers depicting a cyclopean city beneath jagged spires. He'd dismissed it as a fanciful drawing from one of the man's eccentric books. Now he wondered if it was a map. Legrasse began to observe patterns in the disappearances, drawing a rough map of the quarter. The victims were taken from peripheral areas, always near the river or a canal, always under the cloak of fog or heavy rain. He noticed the locations formed a rough crescent, almost as if they were drawing something in. He returned to Beauchamp's apartment, scrutinizing every detail, now with a new lens. He found a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard, revealing a small, intricately carved idol. It was fashioned from a dark, greasy stone, depicting a monstrous, vaguely octopus-like head atop a scaled, bat-winged body. Its eyes, carved with a disturbing realism, seemed to gaze into unfathomable depths. Chillingly, it was slightly damp. Legrasse felt a primal revulsion, a cold dread that went beyond mere superstition. This was not merely a symbol, it felt like an embodiment. He also found a journal hidden among Beauchamp's more mundane papers. It was written in a hurried, increasingly frantic hand. Beauchamp had been researching ancient sea god myths, becoming increasingly convinced that they pointed to a singular, malevolent entity. He detailed encounters with strange, reclusive individuals who spoke of a great old one and a coming awakening. He wrote of their gatherings in secluded parts of the Bayou, of unholy rites, and the unsettling effect they had on the local wildlife. His last entry was particularly disturbing. They say the deep ones have stirred. The Yahantlé rises. I must witness the prophecy. But the dreams are terrible. The voodoo drums warn against it, but they don't understand the power. Legrasse felt a chilling confirmation. Beauchamp hadn't simply vanished. He'd been drawn in, swallowed by the very thing he sought to understand. The cult was active, organized, and growing. They were not just abducting people, they were indoctrinating them, or worse, sacrificing them. He sought out Mama Odette again, sharing his findings, including a rough diagram of the star-shaped symbol he'd found sketched in Beauchamp's journal. identical to one he'd seen near the scene of Dubois' disappearance. Her expression hardened. "That is the mark of the abyssal hand, the ones who follow the deep father. They have taken over a place, an old sugar plantation deep in the swamp, abandoned for generations, a place of dark history already. They desecrate the earth, corrupt the spirits. They call it their sunken temple on land." "And the missing men?" Legrasse asked. "Sacrifices," Mama Odette confirmed, her voice grim. "They believe that the blood of the uninitiated, combined with certain rituals, will weaken the veil between worlds. They wish to hasten the awakening of their master. Their god sleeps but stirs in the dreams of men. They offer him sustenance, a path to this world. What do they want with this great old one?" "Power, of course," she scoffed, a rare display of open disdain. "They believe they will be elevated, transformed, given eternal life by this entity. Fools. They will be consumed along with everything else. The lower they whisper to us. They say this entity, it is not merely a god, it is a force of pure primordial chaos. It dreams realities into being and unbeing. Our spirits, even the fiercest warrior lower, recoil from its presence. They say it makes their very essence shriek in terror. They say it is a horror beyond anything our world has ever known." The gravity of her words was palpable. If the spirits, the very essence of the earth and human belief, were struck dumb with terror, then what chance did mere mortals have? Legrasse, a man of facts and evidence, found himself confronted with a truth that shredded his understanding of the world. He knew he couldn't bring this to his superiors. They'd laugh him out of the precinct, or worse, send him to charity hospital for a mental evaluation. He was alone in this, except for the desperate voodoo practitioners who, for all their mystic ways, seemed to grasp the true nature of the threat more clearly than any rational man could. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and furtive investigations. Legrasse observed the cultists lurking in the shadows of the quarter, their eyes holding a chilling fanaticism, their movements strangely fluid, almost unnatural. He noticed they often congregated near the less frequented docks, loading crates onto small boats that vanished into the bayou under cover of darkness. He knew where they were headed, the old sugar plantation Mama Odette had mentioned, the sunken temple on land. It was a dangerous, desolate stretch of swamp, rumoured to be haunted even by the hardy Bayou folk. But Legrasse felt a desperate urgency. Whatever ritual they were planning, it had to be stopped. He approached Mama Odette again. "I need to know how to find this place, how to get in." She studied him, her ancient eyes piercing. "You go to confront them? Alone? You are a fool, Inspector. A brave fool, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless. This is not a man's fight." "Someone has to fight it," Legrasse retorted, his jaw set. "Your spirits are terrified. My city is vanishing. What else can I do?" Mama Odette sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "There is an old way, a hidden path, known only to a few. A narrow bayou channel, almost impassable, that leads to the plantation's backwater. It is guarded by the oldest spirits, but they are troubled. They might let you pass if you show respect. But know this, Inspector. Your gun will do little against what they call forth." She provided him with a rough map, scrawled on a piece of hide, marking landmarks in a way that only a local could understand. Take salt for cleansing. Take iron for protection. And take this." She pressed a small, intricately carved wooden charm into his hand. It depicted a serpentine figure entwined around a cross. Azuli Frida, lower of love and beauty, but also of protection. She may not understand their darkness, but she despises its ugliness. Legrasse, a man who had long dismissed such things as superstition, clutched the charm. He was stepping into a world where his rational tools were useless, where the rules of man meant nothing. He borrowed a small, shallow draft skiff, a battered thing he'd paid a fisherman a generous sum to keep quiet about. Under the cloak of a moonless night, the air thick with the buzzing of insects and the croaking of unseen frogs, Legrasse navigated the serpentine waterways of the Bayou. The silence was profound, broken only by the dip of his paddle and the rustle of unseen creatures in the cypress knees. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with an inexplicable dread that tightened his chest. The narrow channel Mama Odette had described was almost invisible, choked with cypress roots and hanging Spanish moss. He pushed through, the skiff scraping against unseen obstacles, the oppressive quiet broken only by the splash of water. Then, through a gap in the dense foliage, he saw it. The plantation house was a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky, its columns crumbling, its windows like vacant eyes. A single guttering torch flickered on the overgrown grounds, casting shifting shadows that danced with an unholy life. The air thrummed with a low, guttural chanting, a sound that vibrated deep in Legrasse's bones, stripping away his composure. It was not human. It was not animal. It was something primal. He beached the skiff carefully, hiding it among a thicket of mangroves. Drawing his service revolver, he moved stealthily through the tangled undergrowth, the damp earth sucking at his boots. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of drums. He reached the edge of the clearing, concealed behind a massive cypress tree. The scene before him was a nightmare made manifest. A dozen figures, cloaked in dark hooded robes, swayed around a crude altar fashioned from stacked stones. In the center of the altar lay a bound, struggling form, a man, gagged and terrified. The missing Beauchamp, Legrasse realized with a sickening lurch. He was alive, for now. Before the altar, a tall, gaunt man, clearly the cult leader, raised his arms aloft. His face was obscured by shadow, but Legrasse could see the fanatical gleam in his eyes. He began to intone phrases in a language that defied human phonetics, a series of clicks, hisses, and deep guttural rumbles that scraped against the sanity. It was the same frog talk Fonsi had dismissed. Legrasse watched, horrified, as a shadow began to coalesce over the altar, a shapeless, wavering mass that seemed to drink the meagre light. The cultists chanted louder, their voices rising to a fever pitch. A low, subterranean growl emanated from the very earth, and the air crackled with a palpable, malevolent energy. He heard a gasp from the bound Beauchamp, a desperate struggle against his bonds. The shadow pulsed, growing denser, and in its heart Legrasse thought he saw a hint of something vast, something tentacled and wet, shifting in impossible angles. A chill that had nothing to do with the swamp air permeated his very soul. This was it. This was the cosmic indifference Mama Odette had spoken of, the terror that chilled even the spirits. He couldn't wait any longer. His training screamed at him to call for backup, but he knew there was no backup for this. He raised his revolver, aiming for the cult leader. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice raw, cutting through the unholy din. The chanting ceased abruptly. All heads turned towards him, their hooded faces dark and featureless. The cult leader slowly lowered his arms, his hidden face turning towards Legrasse. A moment of chilling silence descended, broken only by the frantic whimpering of Beauchamp. Then, with a speed that defied his gaunt frame, the cult leader lunged, not at Legrasse, but at Beauchamp, pulling a glinting ritual knife from his robes. Legrasse fired, the gunshot echoing like a cannon blast through the silent swamp. The cult leader stumbled, a crimson bloom spreading on his shoulder. The knife clattered to the ground. The cultists, galvanized by the assault, surged forward, their guttural shouts replacing the chanting. Legrasse fired again, hitting one in the leg. He knew he was outmatched, outnumbered. He wasn't here to capture them. He was here to disrupt their ritual, to save Beauchamp, to buy time. He emptied his revolver into the charging figures, dropping two more before the clicking sound of an empty chamber filled the night. He turned and ran, plunging back into the dense undergrowth, the cultists' enraged cries and the growl from the altar following him. He heard splashes, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs. They were after him. He reached his skiff, scrambling aboard, frantically pushing off. He pulled the paddle and dug it into the murky water, propelling himself deeper into the watery labyrinth. Behind him, the cultists reached the water's edge, their forms shadowy and menacing. One of them raised a strange, convoluted horn to his lips and blew, a haunting, mournful bellow ripping through the swamp, a sound that seemed to pierce the fabric of reality itself. Legrasse didn't look back. He paddled with desperate strength, the sound of the horn, the guttural shouts, and the continued horrifying growl from the plantation fading behind him. He felt a chilling certainty that he had only temporarily delayed something inevitable. He had saved Beauchamp, or at least disrupted his sacrifice, but the larger horror remained. He reached the outskirts of the bayou, the first faint lights of New Orleans visible on the horizon, as the first tendrils of dawn began to paint the sky with bruised purples and greys. He was soaked, exhausted, and profoundly shaken. The memory of the formless shadow, the shifting tentacles, the unholy chanting, clung to him like the swamp mist. He made it back to his apartment, the sun now fully up, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the city. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. Haggard, eyes haunted, a grim understanding etched onto his face. He had seen the cosmic indifference, felt the chilling breath of an entity that dwarfed humanity into insignificance. The world was not as he knew it. It was vaster, colder, and infinitely more terrifying. He hadn't stopped the cult entirely, not yet. He had merely clipped their wings for a moment, but he knew now, with chilling clarity, what they were trying to awaken. He knew what the voodoo spirits feared. He also knew that the information he now possessed, the horrifying truth he had witnessed, would be dismissed as madness by his peers. He was on his own. Legrasse lit a fresh cigarette, the smoke a thin, defiant plume against the encroaching dread. He thought of the words from Beauchamp's note, Yehanthle, Dagon, and he thought of Mama Odette's trembling explanation of the sleeping god that dreams realities into being. He knew with an awful certainty that this was only the beginning. The raid in the swamp, the one that would forever etch these names into the annals of fear, was still to come. He would be ready, a solitary sentinel against a darkness that threatened to consume all. His world had cracked open, revealing an abyss, and he stood on its edge, staring into the void, and the void, he realized, was staring back.